Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Proclaim Peace podcast, where we discover stories of peacemaking through the lens of scriptures. This year, we're talking about the Old Testament. And I'm Patrick Mason. I'm your co-host. I'm here, as always, with my good friend, Jen Thomas. Hi, Jen. Good morning.
Good morning, Patrick. And for those of us listening, I just muffed the introduction 4 times and Patrick had to take over. So that tells you how I'm doing today. But I'm here and showing up is 95% of what matters.
That is 100% true. That was the one thing my parents told me. That was like the one key to parenting. Just show up, right?
Just show up.
So maybe that's the key to podcasting. Our
That's
wonderful
the key to
producer,
podcasting.
our long-suffering producer, Christine, may say there's a little more to it than that, but here we are. I'm glad we've shown up today for this conversation, Jen.
I am too. And I think a little bit of the reason that I muddled is because it was just a really tender conversation. So we're really excited to share with you today. We're going to be talking a little bit about Elijah and Elisha, 2 very different prophets who approached the world from very different lenses, even though they worked really well together. And we're really excited to explore about the different ways that they allow us to think about peacemaking.
Yeah, I think one of the challenges that I've certainly had, that I think a lot of people have when we talk about peacemaking, is that we do have these like amazing models of incredible, like all-star world-class peacemakers, the Martin Luther Kings, the Gandhis, the Nelson Mandelas, right? The Mother Teresas, right? And it's like, we love them. We love those stories. We're inspired by them. And it's like, that is so far beyond what I can do. I will never have that much sizzle, right? I will never have that much courage. And so I like these stories because Elijah is like sort of like that guy. I mean, he's like the prophet of prophets. He's like, he's the one we're still waiting to come back, all those kinds of things.
Yep.
We don't talk about Habakkuk that way or, or some of the others, or even Elisha.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I also really like about this story, a subtext that we don't talk about much in this conversation, but I'd love for our readers to think about, is the fact that I think sometimes we tend to think that there's one approach to peacemaking, there's one approach to righteousness, there's one approach to prophetic vision. And we usually tend to think of that one is the one that's maybe most reflective of our capabilities, personalities, and desires. And I think one of the things that I love about the balance of these 2 stories is that it reminds us as disciples, it reminds us as peacemakers, that there are different God-given talents that can be put to work in peacemaking, that it can be done in very different ways, and that God respects both of those paths. He uses both of those kind of characteristics to produce leaders for his people, and that we as disciples should not be disdainful of one or the other. We shouldn't just be like, oh, this person isn't doing it the way that I think peacemaking the way that I think is more valuable or righteous.
Exactly. So I think it should give us all courage, like whatever gifts, whatever talents, whatever capabilities we have, whatever mantle we have carried, that we can wrap it around our shoulders and walk forward with the gifts and talents in the context that God has called us to at this moment.
Okay. And that is a beautiful introduction for our guest. We are so excited to be joined today by Sarah Perkins. Sarah is absolutely one of those people who has used her gifts and her talents in remarkable ways to share a message of peace out into the world and to use sometimes some of her most really difficult and most painful experiences as a way to talk deeply about how she is committed to transforming the world. Sarah is a writer and a filmmaker who recently earned her PhD in English from Brandeis University, and she did that by creating a gorgeous film that I hope someday is much more publicly available. She, alongside her husband, is a co-author of the Book of Mormon storybook and the Bible storybook, and you can find her on Instagram at 4 Little Saints. She is one of my very favorite Instagram follows. I have a good friendship with her and have been so blessed as a colleague of her because she works as sort of oversees all of our peacemaking work at Mormon Women for Ethical Government and makes sure that we stay true to that principle in all that we do. We are so grateful to have her with us today to share her insights and her real lasting and true hope for the world, which is one of the things that shines out in everything that she does. Welcome, Sarah. We are so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you.
We are going to start the way we always do, which is asking you a question about how you define peace. And I know you've given probably a lot more thought to this than many of our guests. And so I'm really excited to hear what you have to say today.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this. I mean, I obviously love Martin Luther King's peace is not the absence of conflict, but the presence of justice. But as I've been my husband and I make movies about different peace stories and peacemaking stories. And we've been interviewing many people who have been involved in making peace in really entrenched conflicts. I think one thing I've been realizing is that peace is so fluid. It takes ongoing creativity and flexibility and adjustment and attentiveness. It's like a river in that sense, in that like you'll never step in the same piece twice, right? Like I think it's something this is always changing, always passed on to each new generation, and each new generation embodies it anew with different people, different understandings, different approaches, different hearts. Yeah, I think peace is always newly made is how I'll define it for today.
I love that. I love that sense. It's organic, it's dynamic, it changes. In some ways, it does what it needs to and goes where it needs to, the way that a river does. I like that a lot. Well, I'm excited about what we're going to be talking about today. We're going to we'll talk about some of the more famous stories from the Old Testament, especially once we're kind of out of like the Moses period and all of that. And in terms of the Israelite prophets, we're going to talk about Elijah and Elisha. And no doubt we will mix up those names. Why couldn't they have been like Fred and Tom or something like that? But so let's start with Elijah. Tell us a little bit more about how you think about him, his prophethood, his ministry, and also what does it have to do with peacemaking? I'm not sure that that's like the first association that the people have with Elijah.
Yeah, I mean, he's like the prophet's prophet, right? Like he's the guy. He like the sort of superstar prophet. I feel like he's the guy
archetype.
Totally. He calls down the fire in the priest of Baal.
Mm-hmm.
How do you say that? And then he's like God was not in the whirlwind. Like these beautiful passages that are all like super flashy, right? And lots of like energy and dramatic forces behind them and around them.
Some violence.
Some violence for sure.
He's inflicting God's wrath unabashedly on people.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even though he's the still small voice guy, like he's not the still small voice.
And yet I will slay you all. Yeah.
But also I think Elijah is the widow Zarephath, right? With and he heals her son and he provides for her when it seems like all of the miracles have run out, when the water is dried up and the land is dry. Like God's miracles continue to provide for this family. But I think he is associated with this really, really sort of big, very present, very powerful, just God. And I think that does feel a little bit like there's some tension when we're trying to talk about him as a peacemaker. But for me, I feel like so much of peace movements requires that I studied requires some amount of speaking truth to power, of calling out injustice, of often dismantling systems so that you can come up with newer, more fair systems, more just systems. And I think that's absolutely what we see Elisha doing all the time. This is unjust, or this system is oppressive, or violent or immoral in some way. And I think he was always, very powerfully speaking truth and I think doing his best, right, to represent God's will in a more moral way of moving forward and moving throughout the world.
So I totally appreciate this, because I completely agree that we can't just meet injustice with passivity or just with super smiley kindness. It doesn't work. And so much of what I think of disruptions to our peace are caused by systemic problems, right? We've set up systems that perpetuate injustice, perpetuate conflict, and dismantling those systems were set up in ways that benefit somebody. And so somebody's going to feel like a loser if they get dismantled. I would love to hear either experiences that you've had from people that you've studied, or just your personal thoughts on how we can approach peace sort of in the Elijah way, which is like, I am going to move towards justice. I am going to accept that change needs to happen, without allowing it to make us into or inhabit the characteristics that set up systemic injustice in the first place. Like so often it's like, okay, here's a wrong. I'm going to right this wrong by creating another wrong. I guess I'm trying to figure out how do we directly fight wrongs, but do it in a way that doesn't just create.
Yeah, and I'll piggyback off of that, because it's like sometimes we have this phrase like speak truth to power, which seems that seems like a great virtue, right? But and it is, it's super important. But it also seems to like when you're doing that, you can act however you want, you can speak however you want, you can think about and treat the other person however you want. so long as you're speaking truth to power. It excuses almost anything. So, and in Elijah's case, he does, like, burn up lots of priests. What I guess the divine fire does, right?
Yes, but
and stuff. So yeah, so just piggybacking off of Jen's question, how do we do that, but do it in a way that actually fosters peace rather than perpetuates a cycle of conflict?
Totally. And yeah, I mean, these are really big questions. I think for sure all the time I see people like justify to me, which seems like obviously bad behavior. I am speaking the truth and defending righteousness, and I am being a peacemaker.
Like, are you?
Yeah. And I feel like anytime we're like actively leaning into contempt in the name of peacemaking, we should take pause. I think I'm trying to decide what to pull from. In my own life, right? Like we filed a lawsuit, my husband and I, which I had such a negative perception of people who filed lawsuits, right? Like these litigious jerks, right?
Like, why can't you just work it out?
Yeah.
Right?
And I felt like very strange about that and very, very complicated about it, particularly because like some of the people in these in the lawsuit that we filed were like friends of somebody who I care very deeply about and very dear and have a very dear relationship with. And it like I worked through that, right? Like I continue to work through that when we went to depositions and like at every stage of the lawsuit, it felt really, really complicated. And I think there is a way in which you can try to continue to look the people in the eyes, right? As you're like, and maintain their humanity as you're also trying to build better systems, build a more equitable and fair world. And I remember after we were in a hearing a while back, we had to like go recess in the hallway for a little while. And my husband went over and like started chatting with one of like the opposing people, right? And it was like, what are you doing? This is a terrible idea. And I think his dad actually ended up being like, this isn't over yet. Come back over here. But it was this lovely, actually, I think, moment of like, you're a human. Yeah. I'm a human.
We're trying to change a system, but that doesn't mean that we're necessarily enemies.
Yeah. And it might have been like really terrible strategy, but I think it was helpful for me even just to remind like, this is someone who I could actually have a conversation with conceivably. Maybe not right now, but like I could have a conversation with them. And in most of the peace processes that we've talked about, I think the big turning point for so many of these people who were in like entrenched conflict, right? Like violence on the street, people dying, their friends dying, their family members dying. I think moving them from this place of really, really high, intense conflict to actually sitting at a table and working out a compromise and finding a way to move forward in this country together was learning to imagine a world in which a country in which they are part of me and their interests matter to my interests and their humanity is just as real as my humanity. And I don't think you can move forward in the peace process without that, or in any kind of conflict, right? Whether you're filing a lawsuit or whether you're repairing deep harm in countries or whether you're like trying to get along with your primary chorister, right?
It's a reminder that systems certainly are set up by people, but that it's people that matter, right? And so we can try to move towards changing a system, and particularly like a lawsuit is doing that peacefully. It's not taking up arms. It's not saying this person harmed me, I'm going to slaughter them in their bed. It's saying I'm going to use the law to kind of try to resolve a problem that I have with someone. And I just love that idea. And I think it's a challenge for all of us to not hate the people that set up the systems or to disdain the people that set up the systems or the people who generationally might seem responsible for the systems, but to say, no, I'm going to change this, but I'm still going to make a place for the people that set up those systems in the new world I'm creating.
For people who might be like conflict avoidant, which is most of us, that's just most people statistically, how can we be a little bit more like Elijah? What are some pro tips, on being that kind of peacemaker without, going the route that we've just talked about, demonizing and turning people into objects and those kinds of things?
Yeah. Well, as a pro at avoiding conflict, I don't know. I mean, I think just, like the wilderness in the Old Testament is a really like famously useful at like bringing forth really divine things out of people. But the wilderness is never comfortable, right? Like conflict is never comfortable. It's always awkward. It always feels like, oh, I wish like I think anytime I brought up a sticky conversation, like within seconds, I'm always like, shouldn't have said anything. Why?
Do I really want to do this?
Let me back up a little bit. Yeah. But I also feel like, the wilderness is a divine place. Conflict, I think, really does have the potential to bring forth beautiful things, even though it's always awkward and never comfortable.
I like that. Well, should we shift to Elisha a little bit? So there's this like famous passing of the mantle. And, we oftentimes talk about that in the church as the succession of prophets. And I think that's a really important way to think about it and talk about it. Talk about it. How do you think about that succession and the transition from one person to another, from one style of peacemaking to another, one style of prophethood to another?
Yeah. Yeah. So the story goes, right, that Elijah has this like red mantle that he wears so that everybody can recognize him as a prophet. Or whatever purpose it serves. And he hits the water, and the water of the River Jordan parts, and he walks across with Elisha, who's like his prophet apprentice.
Flashy. He's flashy, always flashy. Never doing things halfway.
Horses, flaming horses with a golden chariot come down and pick him up and take off. And he drops the mantle, and Elisha picks it up. We were telling our kid this, or you're reading it from our books to our kids a couple weeks ago, and my son was like, do you know what sounds way better than dying? Which is true.
He is not wrong. Yeah.
It was a very awesome way to exit stage left, right?
Yeah. Elvis has left the building.
No press releases for him. Nope.
So then amazingly, right? Like you just see this like massive miracle, right? Like nothing you will ever see again, most of us. And Elisha then goes and picks up this mantle. And he strikes the River Jordan with it, which is just astonishing to me, right? Like little old me, this kid who is, I think, like a farmer or something like that, says like, okay, this is my turn, this is my time, and he has the faith to try. I think we have a line in our book, like if you're willing to try when you might fail, that is something, right? Like I think that is a something that he accomplished in that moment. And the water does part, and he walks across. And I think there's some irony that Elijah and Elisha is just because their names are so similar and they come one right after the other. I think we confuse them all the time. They're probably like the most confused two prophets of any. But I think their approach to the prophethood is really, really different. Elijah, as we've discussed, is really flashy and lots of fire in his imagery. Elisha, his miracles are like somebody makes a soup with gourds that have gone bad, and he like adds some flour and the soup is not bad anymore. Or he makes oil last longer, or the water in the river is tasting bad or is not great, and so he like blesses the river and it is good water now, right? Like these are such like homespun miracles, They feel so simple and not trivial, but just homey compared to like calling down fire on the priests of Baal. And I think if we're looking at this as how do we be peacemakers, I think again in almost every peacemaking instance, you need the people who are willing to speak truth to power, who are willing to call out injustice and find new ways and take down old systems so that we can create new systems. But also like an absolutely necessary component of that is people who are willing to interact as peacemakers, like person to person, heart to heart, who are willing to bring soup, right? Or like dig wells or purify. Oh, your water is bad. Let me come help with that. And do this really, really, I think, humanizing work of engaging with people as people in the way that we talked about. And I think Elisha really does fulfill that role as a prophet and as a person.
So one of the things that struck me is it feels very gendered to me that there is a kind of peacemaking that is more allowed for men, right? It's the flashy power. I'm going to defeat the armies, in tricky ways or whatever. And then this gentle, restorative nurturing. And I just would love your thoughts on that, because I think that's too bad. I think we actually need both women who can speak truth to power and be forceful about it, and men who recognize the deep healing nature of peacemaking. And one of the things I think I do appreciate is that I feel like I have seen those patterns alternate even within our own church leadership over the years. And I just think that's a good thing for us. I'd love your thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. That it reminded me immediately of Monica McWilliams, who led the Women's Coalition in Northern Ireland. And she was very, very vocal and involved in the negotiations and in standing up for the rights of the marginalized and the minorities during the peace negotiations in Northern Ireland. She brought a very unique and important voice to those talks. And she tells this amazing story of during the last few weeks of the talks, people were like sleeping in the office buildings, right? And it was just so intense, and they had such a strong, difficult to make deadline to come up with a treaty and to come up with an agreement. And so the women were feeling anxious about showing up to the press day after day wearing the same clothes. And so they started like trading jackets and blouses and like switching up outfits with each other so that they didn't look like they had worn the same clothes for the last 4 days. And they would they had something that would allow them to boil eggs, and they would make egg sandwiches for each other. And at one point, like, some dude shows up at the doorway and he's like, I heard you guys have egg sandwiches. And it's just this amazing story, I think, of like the sort of very basic human caring that goes into this much louder, much more present, much more public sort of like, peacemaking with the treaties and with the negotiations and with like signing your name in front of all the cameras. I don't know, just this very, very human component that women, I think, are uniquely good at, but also that everybody benefits right? Like the water lifts all boats. And certainly I've seen examples of men doing that as well, for sure.
Yeah, it reminds me, when you mentioned like digging wells or something like that, it reminds me of not one of my like prouder moments from my mission. I think in a lot of ways, the way that we structure missions are very much around sort of like masculine forms of energy and doing and proselytizing and counting baptisms and the numbers and the stats and the way that we've done all of that. And I was in a lot of ways like a very traditional missionary like that worked for me. And there's a lot of healing and peacemaking that comes with that as you talk to people and they literally change their lives and you're spreading the gospel. And so that approach really does bear fruit. And I had one companion who that did not work for him. He was actually a farm kid from Idaho. And he said he was miserable. He hated knocking on doors. He didn't even like the teaching, like the part that like most people was like, oh, like when you're actually like sitting down and talking to somebody. And he's like, I just wish they had sent me to Africa to dig wells or something like that. And in my 19-year-old brain, like I couldn't get that. Like that's not what a mission was, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we had all kinds of conflict and I just didn't get it. And now, thankfully, with a little more, seasoning, like I get it. And that would have been an amazing thing. And now that the church has more opportunities, I think we're still figuring out how to do different kinds of mission. It'd be nice to sort of expand that, even more for our 18 and 19 and 20-year-olds. But like there are different ways to go about doing this, and it's all mission or it's all peacemaking. It's and sometimes we just get like this story in our mind of what like the best kind, or again the flashiest, the most public, the things that you can count, as if that is like the real thing, and other things are somehow ancillary or supportive or something,
or they don't bear fruit, right? They don't count.
Yeah. That. I never served a mission, but that reminds me of this story from my husband, Josh, on his mission. He just had like a series of really difficult companions, as happens on missions. And he had this one companion who, he had like some sort of genetic thing where he was 4 feet tall, right? He was a short little guy, and he looked really young. He looked like he was 12 years old, and he just had severe and debilitating depression. And he was like out trying to do this mission, and it was just so hard on this 19-year-old kid. And they were at the mission president's house, and his mission companion was like in the office with the president, meeting with the president, and Josh was sitting outside, and he's like, I don't know what to do. And he was like trying to pray. He was like, please bless this elder, right? Like there's not so much that you can do. And so then he found there's a hymn book sitting beside him, and he took the hymn book and he just started singing hymns in the hallway to the elder. And I feel like that feels, I don't know, just like this moment of caring. Like, I'm here with you. I'm trying to like make my support for you known in some way that's like not totally comfortable for me, because I know that you're not totally comfortable either right now. Anyway, yeah.
Well, and I think one of the things I love about these stories of Elisha is that we take for granted how hard it is to build peace or to feel peace when your temporal conditions are miserable. And And for this elder, temporal conditions were miserable. And probably it's true for this Idaho farm kid who wanted to go work. He wanted his way of expressing love and affection, and maybe he wanted to work. And I physically. And so I think one of the things that I love about Elisha and this story is that it reminds us that we can do all the big flashy things in the world, but ultimately if the people around us are in deep physical discomfort, they're in pain, they're hungry, they're thirsty, it's going to be actually very hard for them to participate in or feel peace.
Yeah. So how do you think then, Sarah, about peace, especially as we think through the lens of Elisha, as peacemaking as a kind of restoration, as healing, a little different model than the kind of speaking truth to power?
Yeah. So I think my favorite story of Elisha is the story of They That Be With Us. And I think we do often do a disservice to that story because we don't tell the whole story. So the story goes that there is a Syrian army that kept trying to attack. Let's see, Elisha was in the northern kingdom, right?
Sure.
Kept trying to attack the kingdoms.
For the purposes of this conversation, yes.
They kept trying to attack this kingdom, the kingdom of Israel, I think. And Elisha kept foiling their plans because he would figure out, prophesy where they were going to attack, and the kingdom of Israel would head him off. And so at first the Syrians think that they have a mole, but then they realize it's a prophet. So then they go to attack the prophet. And Elisha's servant is outside and he sees these armies coming, like the dust that they're kicking up and the clear presence that an army is headed their way. And he runs to tell Elisha, and Elisha's totally unbothered. And the servant's freaking out. He's like, "What are you doing?" And Elisha says, "They that are with us are more than they that be with them." And the servant is confused, and Elisha prays that his eyes will be opened. And the servant opens his eyes, sees more clearly, and he sees that there's angels all around them and that they way far outnumber the army that's coming to destroy them. And that's normally where we stop with this story. That's about as far as we go. And for years, I assumed that the angels were just going to totally decimate this army, that they were going to take them out. But that isn't.
This was a force, that this was a situation of force, right? You have more force on your side.
Totally. Yeah. And that it was a matter of numbers, right? We outnumber them. We're going to win this battle. They're going to be we're going to totally take them out and it's going to be fine. But then the army shows up, and instead Elisha prays that they will be blinded, and they're blinded. And so they that stops them short, right? And so then Elisha leads them. And again, my assumption is he'll lead them to a cliff or something and say promise that you'll never come back.
Yeah.
And they do.
Or haha, you're blind, we're killing you, right?
But he doesn't do that. Instead, he leads them straight into the middle of Samaria, the capital of Israel, which is where they were trying to get to anyway. And the gates close around them, and then he restores their eyesight. And the king of Israel is okay, so now do we kill them?
When does the killing start?
Yeah. So when can we start killing our enemies?
Thank you for delivering that. That was very convenient. So do we do our job now?
Chop, chop. Yep.
And Elisha says, no, now you feed them. And they do, right? They feed this army, this army that comes in with the intent of conquering. They're taking out the prophet so that they can conquer the people. And then the chapter ends saying, then they let them go home, right? And the army goes home, and this army never comes and attacks the kingdom of Israel again. And it's this way more, I think it's the only army that it suggests that about, right? The Philistines and the Babylon, all of these armies come back again and again and again until the kingdoms of Israel, either Israel or Judea, are just decimated, right? But this army doesn't. This army doesn't come back. And it's just this way more effective, longer lasting peace that's established not by the total decimation by angels, right? But by sharing a meal together. And if it's okay, I'll just read we wrote this story in our Old Testament Bible story book, the Old Testament. And this is
we were hoping you'd read from it today.
Okay. These are the last 3 paragraphs of that story. It goes, and Elisha restored sight to the blind army and then told the people of Israel to bring them food and water. But instead of some soup or jerky or day-old bagels, the people prepared a whole feast. In the Bible, it says a feast of great provisions. And they ate and sang songs and danced like they were celebrating a holiday together. And they were. For only a few times in history have armies put down their swords and differences and met like this. And each time it was a miracle. And each time it was a revelation, a realization, a chance to see the world more accurately. There are precious few bad guys. And that doesn't mean that there aren't wars or death or tragedy or crimes or suffering. That's all real. But so is this. There are many, 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 many more good people in this world than bad ones. There are more people for us than against us. There is more love than hate, more caring than indifference, more humanity than its opposite. And this will not always seem true. At times, it will seem like nobody cares or people are selfish and cruel. And when you feel this way, look again. It's not that you're wrong. It's just that there's something else too. Heat waves rising over the kettle, a soft light, a mirage, a silvery something. And if you look, you will see them, the terrified soldiers, the golden angels, the enemy, the friend. In the end, they are all part of us. And though we might not know it yet, we are fighting for each other.
That's beautiful. I think it's a great model here that so often, as you say, we stop the story short. Right? And I think this is part of what conflict does to us, is it like narrows our vision. It narrows our moral imagination. We stop the story short about the other person or the other people, or about the horizons of possibility that are here. It has such a narrowing, and that's a very natural thing. No doubt it has to do with like brain chemistry and stuff like that. So it's not evil or something like that. It's just something. And this is what like prophets do. This is what what learning the skills and tools and language of peacemakers does, is it gives us these tools to expand the moral imagination when all of the incentives are to narrow them. So I just love the way that you end that story and see it.
Yeah. So there's I've been re-listening to some of our interviews with these people from South Africa and Northern Ireland, and we did an interview with Harold Good, who is a Methodist minister who, with a Catholic priest, was charged with overseeing the disarmament of Northern Ireland. And in his interview, he talks about how you can't just say like, come and bring your weapons. You have to, and then we will destroy them, and then you will have no more weapons, because that feels like surrender, because that is surrender, right? And surrender will only increase resentment and just kick the conflict down the road. And so he talks about how disarmament is really ultimately an act of imagination, of persuading people of a new world, the possibility of a new world where they no longer have to have paramilitaries that are armed in order to protect their families. And there's a lot that he can't say about it because so much of it was really confidential, but he tells a story of speaking with an IRA member and trying to persuade him, like, these treaties are real and people really are giving up their weapons, and this world is coming into being. And these agreements, like I saw these agreements happen. And the IRA member said, you are asking me to believe something that I have never seen. And Harold Good said, and that reminded me of poor St. Thomas, who was asked to believe something that he couldn't see. That was almost impossible.
That had never been.
That had never been. That was almost impossible to imagine. And then he pauses in the interview and he says, blessed are they who believe. I feel like that's actually just a beautiful statement about peacemakers, is blessed are the peacemakers who believe in this possibility of a better world, a less violent world, a kinder world, a world where justice thrives, but so does civility and brotherly love. I think that's a hard world to see, a hard world to imagine. But blessed are they who believe, nonetheless.
It just strikes me as we've been talking about this. I think about everything that my society, movies, everything I have seen and, consumed in my life. And I'm not really much of a consumer of violence, but that fighting that army seems completely normal. Like, that's a courage that it's easy to summon. I'm going to protect my family. I'm going to go to battle. I'm going to reenact Lord of the Rings, yada, yada. But I think that what is so hard for me, even as a peace builder, to imagine is how I could summon the courage to be face to face with my enemy and feed them and to welcome them into my home. And that is a level of courage that I don't think we see. And I love the way you framed that part of our job as peacemakers is to, in small ways, in big ways, make visible something new, right? So that the people around us can say, oh, I saw that. I might have seen it on a really small scale in my Sunday school class. I might have seen it in a really, what might not seem like a hugely impactful way at my town meeting. But that if we can just give people visibility into that, then we give them something that they can kind of trust and and maybe believe in. I don't know. I love the way you framed that. It's just really, really beautiful.
Yeah. So I want to, as we kind of move towards wrapping up, Sarah, I want to sort of tie this back to like your storybook project, which I think is like so beautiful, the Book of Mormon and the Bible, the storybooks. It seems like, I mean, what we're talking about here is the power of story, the power of narrative. So just talk to me about like your and Josh's strategy here, your theory of change in retelling familiar stories, but telling them faithfully. And I mean that both in the sense that like you're telling the stories, but you're telling them with this kind of the faith of Elisha to see new things, to see new possibilities, to see new horizons in these very old and familiar stories.
Yeah, I mean, so much of this project is really just about our family, selfishly, probably.
Yeah.
We have 3 little boys, and our oldest son, Clarence, he's just 7 years old. And I feel like he's actually had like a surprisingly hard life for 7 years. Like he's gone through a lot for somebody who's so young. And I think he has a lot of reasons for thinking the world is a really scary place and a really, really difficult place to be. And he's been hurt by people, right? In ways that a child never should have been. And by systems that didn't work for our family when they needed to work for our family. And I remember a couple years ago, I was talking with Clarence, and he was like, I think he was 5 or something like that. And we were just over dinner, and he was saying, "Mom, do you have charity for the whole world?" And I was like, "Nope, absolutely not. There are people who it's too hard for me to have charity for them, bud. Sorry." And he thought about it for a second. He's like, "Do you mean like the people who really scared our family?" And I said, "Yeah, those people, it's really hard for me to have charity for them." And he thought about it for a second, and he said, "Well, maybe I can try to have charity for them, and then you can borrow some of mine."
Wow.
And I said, "Clarence, you are a remarkable kid. Do you know that?" And he looked at me super wide-eyed, and he said, "Because I can turn invisible?"
Like that too.
I think so much of our writing in these stories is trying to write to this kid who has every reason to doubt the world, but trying to help him imagine a world that he can love anyway. Because God so loves the world, even when it's broken God's heart, millions of times, billions of times, with each of God's children. And to hope and to try to imagine a reality that's here, I think, in this soil, on this ground with these people, that is good and that is kind and compassionate and that can be drawn into being with something as simple as a good story.
Well, Sarah, it has been an absolute joy to have you with us today. I think I'm going to feast on this for a while. I'm going to be thinking about it. So thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. I think you might have just answered that question, but we might make you reiterate it. Where do you find peace?
I don't know. With people mostly, I think. People are so many things, but I think they're good.
I agree.
That's great. Sarah, thank you so much. Thanks for your wisdom. Thanks for everything you bring into the world, the creativity, the imagination, and helping us all see the world with new eyes.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Proclaim Peace. To hear more, you can subscribe on a podcast app of your choice or on YouTube. You can always find full show notes or transcriptions at proclaimpeace.org.
Proclaim Peace is a partnership between MWEG and Waymakers. You can learn more about Waymakers at waymakers.us. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next time.